anyone...
And Mike Scioscia likes defensive catchers because he was one.
And anyone can break out on an offensive explosion.
He liked Jeff Mathis more than he liked Chris Iannetta, and there was a big arbitration thing about that a few years ago. There's this damn fly that's bothering me. Gee
I know,
whiz.
I see that.
I feel like John Adams.
Like, what's going on?
I feel like John Adams.
I know. I thought you were trying to get my attention. I was like, what's going on?
Hi, Dominic. How are you? This stupid fly. Can I please get some hairspray?
Yeah,
I mean, gee whiz. I'm trying to show you that this fly. It's going to fly into my mouth. I mean, gee whiz.
We don't want that.
One minute you're going to start choking. You're not going to know what's going on. But the fly's going to die. So it's
the
okay.
White Sox signed Miguel Gonzalez to a one-year deal worth $4.75 million last year for the White Sox and Rangers. He went 8-13 with a 4.62 ERA. What are your thoughts on the deal?
This is a deal that improves the pitching staff and it improves the emotions in the locker room. Apparently he's a very great locker room guy, and this just I'm not going to say bolsters. I'm going to use the right word. It enhances the White Sox rotation. It's going to make it not too much better, but better enough where they can actually compete and win games.
They need a lot of help on the rotation, but I'm not a big Miguel Gonzalez fan. Was good for the Orioles, but fell off a cliff this year. $4.75 million to me, that's an overpay. I'm not crazy about this deal. So, on that note, let's take a quick break. Don't go anywhere, because we'll have an exclusive interview that yours truly and the True Hockey Maven, tell that other guy can't say that enough, Eleanor Ciampi did, with Ben Raby, the author of 100 Things Capitals Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. But first, be the first caller to 516-572-7440, and you'll win a 4-pack of tickets to Monster Jam Triple Threat Series on Sunday, February 4th at 1 p.m. at NYCB Live, home of the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, plus a pair of pit party passes starting at 10:30 a.m., including access to the Monster Jam trucks and drivers. Get autographs, take photos, and see the trucks up close. Watch as the drivers go head-to-head in 7 different competitions, driving 3 different vehicles, Monster Jam trucks, speedsters, and ATVs. For more information, visit nycblive.com. Again, the number to call to win tickets is 516-572-7440. Quick disclaimer, though, that is Super Bowl Sunday. I'm just going to
That's what I was about to say. I was going to say that.
It's during the day, too, so you can go enjoy some monster trucks and then come home to some nice,
and then join me at my Super Bowl party.
Yes, there you
We
go.
always do that, too.
Ben Raby interview coming up next on Beyond the Game on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Those serving in our military, they're the difference makers. Separated from family, enduring hardships far from home. Sacrificing for their country, while serving in a different country. Well, for those of us who support our armed forces through the USO, we get to make a difference too. Through the USO, we get to be the force that delivers the phone call between spouse and deployed service member. The force that brings newborn and new parent together through a delivery room video chat. And the force that makes sure our military serving 7,000 miles away gets to watch the big game from a USO center. We get to be the force behind the forces, connecting them to every comfort of family, home, and country possible. It's a good feeling to make a difference. Visit uso.org/force to learn how you can be the force behind the forces.
Yeah.
Hey, check it out. I'm gonna need you to turn up your volume.
No. I'm supposed to say that. Come on. Hey, look, check it out. It's your guy, DJ Steph, the saucy man himself. Tune into It's Saucy, where I play nothing but hip-hop and reggae music.
1, 2, 3, hit me!
Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. on the Voice of Nassau Community College on 90.3 WHPC.
Listen!
90.3 WHPC reminds you that you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent.
There are thousands of teens in foster care who will love you just the same.
There are thousands of siblings in foster care who are waiting for an adopted family.
There are 108,000 children and youth currently waiting in foster care for permanent families.
For more information on how you can adopt, go to adoptusa.org. uskids.org.
A message from the Ad Council and the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
All right, we're back on Beyond the Game on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I am Jacob Valk. Sitting across from me is Eleanor Ciampi, and we are fortunate enough to be joined by Ben Raby, the author of 100 Things Capitals Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. Ben, how are you?
I'm good. Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So, why did you decide to write this type of book about the Capitals?
Well, a little bit of the background. Have been covering the Capitals for nearly a decade here in Washington, primarily as a member of the Capitals broadcast team on the radio network, and have had an interest over the years in sort of collecting history and anecdotes and acknowledging on our broadcast milestones and anniversaries, and have been fortunate to develop some strong relationships with quite a few former players and coaches and executives and broadcasters, all kinds of folks who have passed through the organization over the years, even predating my time here in Washington. And with all of that background and those relationships that had been built, felt I was in a good position to sort of put some of these anecdotes and stories together in one collection. And fortunately, with the help of the folks from Triumph Books, was able to do that with the release of 100 Things Capitals Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, which I should preface by saying it is primarily things Capitals fans should know. It's a lot of anecdotes and stories, behind-the-scenes stories, if you will, and we complement the book with a few little bucket list items, if you will, that Capitals fans should do.
That's really, really cool. So what can you tell us about Alex Ovechkin?
Well, quite a bit, but I'll tell you this, as far as Alex Ovechkin, some of the more interesting anecdotes and stories I got about Alex were actually going back to his rookie season when he came into the league in 2005-06. The Capitals at that point were not the perennial Stanley Cup contender they have become these days. At the time, they were a rebuilding club. They were a last-place team. They were, at times, an eyesore and difficult to watch. But in 05-06, Alex Ovechkin comes as advertised. There was a lot of hype about the first overall pick from 2004, and he came over and had a terrific rookie season. And it was interesting hearing some of the stories, more so from the veterans of that team, guys who were maybe at the end of their careers, guys who would maybe have a tough time going through an 82-game campaign when the playoffs weren't the reality for that team. And they sort of lived vicariously, I think, through an exuberant 20-year-old Alex Ovechkin, who everything was fresh for him. He was setting rookie records during that campaign. He finished with 50 goals. He won the Rookie of the Year award, and it seemed every night, every city they went into, the team was being received, even by opposing fans, as must-watch, and it was largely because of Alex Ovechkin. So his impact on the team and on the Washington Capitals organization as a whole, it was felt early on, even going back to the rookie season, and maybe something now folks take for granted, how strong he is and how good of a personality he is. But going back to his rookie season, I think it caught some of the few veterans on the team by surprise, and I think it was a pleasant surprise at the time for sure.
Talking to Ben Raby, the author of 100 Things Capitals Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. So, can you lay out for us the career of Ole the goalie?
Yeah, Ole Kolzig was a first-round pick of the Capitals in 1989. He would emerge, and he remains the winningest goalie in franchise history, the only goaltender in team history to win more than 400 games with the franchise. And the interesting story about Ole Kolzig is how long it took him to actually become the elite franchise goalie. I referenced he was a first-round pick in 1989, and you figure as a first-round pick, the organization might roll out the carpet for you, and it might only be a matter of time before you come on and you take the reins as the number one. Well, in the case of Ole Kolzig, it took almost 9 years. It took 8.5 years, you could say, until the 97-98 campaign when he finally emerged as a bona fide number one goalie with the Capitals. And it was interesting in talking to Ole for this project. He acknowledged 8 years for a first-round goalie to become an everyday number one. You don't see that anymore. Teams and organizations, they're not that patient with their prospects anymore. And Ole acknowledged it took him a while. It took him longer than he would have expected, longer than the team maybe would have expected for him to develop into an everyday NHLer. And he acknowledged maybe he was fortunate with the timing that it was in the early 1990s, the mid-90s, where maybe the organization had a little bit more patience than teams might today with a struggling first-round pick who eventually the team might move on from. But once Ole came on board, I referenced that 97-98 season, it was a storybook year for Ole Kolzig. It really set the stage for his eventual lengthy career. He led the team on a surprising run to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1998, still the only time the Capitals have ever been to the Stanley Cup Finals. And in speaking to a lot of players from that 1998 team, when you talk about that run to the finals, unsolicited, they all point towards Ole Kolzig. Look, you got to have a good goaltender to make a deep postseason run. That's understood, but they point to Ole Kolzig and they say that they just rode on his back and he led them to the Stanley Cup Finals. And it was really a coming-out party for Ole Kolzig, who again would go on to win more than 300 career games. He won the Vezina Trophy in 2000 as the NHL's goaltender of the year. So certainly a collected resume from Ole Kolzig, but one that he even acknowledges himself. In retrospect, he's kind of relieved that it even did take off after the organization showed so much patience as he developed for years in the minor leagues.
That really is so interesting. Would you be able to describe to us the career of Peter Bondra?
Yeah, Peter Bondra, also a franchise legend here in Washington, a guy who pretty much owned all the offensive scoring records until that Alex Ovechkin came along and has rewritten the record book and made it his own personal resume. But Peter Bondra really throughout the 1990s and into the early 2000s, along with Ole Kolzig, the face of this Washington Capitals franchise. And the interesting story about Peter Bondra is for a guy who had finished his career with more than 500 career goals, he was almost a little bit of a diamond in the rough. The Capitals selected him in the 8th round of the 1990 NHL draft, 156th overall. Nobody really knew who he was, and the Capitals actually stumbled upon him by accident. The head of scouting at the time, a guy named Jack Button, went overseas to Czechoslovakia to scout another player, a player who himself had a lengthy NHL career, a defenseman named Richard Schmelik, but he went overseas to scout Richard Schmelik, and while he was on that trip, he noticed a player on the other team. He wasn't even there to scout. He noticed this number 12 in white, and it turned out to be Peter Bondra. He was very impressed with him, and Jack Button then made it his mission for the rest of his trip to Czechoslovakia to keep an eye on that Peter Bondra fella, and sure enough, he ended up being the guy the Capitals took and went a long way in putting the Capitals on the map in the 1990s and, again, into the early 2000s. So it's funny, in retrospect, something I learned in doing the research and speaking to people for the book is really how a lot of these players who turned out to be superstars, sort of their paths, they're not all like Alex Ovechkin, right? They're not all going to be the first overall pick. They're not all going to be the highly touted prospect who everything goes great right from the get-go. A lot of these guys, whether it's Ole Kolzig or Peter Bondra, they might come the unorthodox route. It might take them a while to develop in the case of Ole Kolzig, and Peter Bondra, again, an example of a guy who, even at age 22 when he was drafted, was 4 years after he would have been eligible to be drafted. So a guy who certainly came a little bit of the unorthodox route, but made himself a terrific career in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking to Ben Raby, the author of 100 Things Capitals Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. So what can you tell us about Brian Murray?
Brian Murray, the winningest coach in Capitals history, and a hockey legend, really, who just passed away this past summer, but certainly a guy who, left his mark in Washington, if you will. For context, the Capitals at the start of their history were a miserable bunch. They missed the playoffs the first 8 years of franchise history, and it's funny now because you look at the Vegas Golden Knights in the modern-day NHL and how successful they are as an expansion team. The Washington Capitals in the 1970s was the other end of the spectrum. They were an awful, awful expansion franchise, literally the worst in NHL history. They won only 8 of their first 80 games in their inaugural season, missed the playoffs their first 8 years. So all that being said, it was a carousel, as you could imagine, behind the bench. There was a lot of turnovers when it came to head coaches, and finally in 1982, the Capitals decided to make another coaching change, and they brought in Brian Murray, who at the time had no NHL head coaching experience. He was at the time the bench boss of their minor league affiliate in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but they brought in Brian Murray, who had no experience, and within a few months they hired David Poile as the general manager, and with Murray behind the bench and Poyle running the ship, after missing the postseason their first 8 years, things turned around, and they actually went on a run of making the playoffs 14 straight seasons, and Brian Murray was behind the bench for the first 8 of those years, and he was a guy when the team really took that step in the 1980s. They went from really being a laughingstock and a miserable team to a legitimate perennial contender, a playoff team on an annual basis. Brian Murray largely responsible for that behind the bench. He really brought out the best